I'm happy to have with us today Marco Boer and Jim Milliot from Marco's from IT Strategies. Jim is from Publishers Weekly. So we want to also thank our partners at Publishers Weekly for their support of this event. Kevin in the back, thank you so much. We're going to start by level setting here, try to get kind of a quote unquote state of the industry. Where are we at with everything? Marco brings a wealth of experience on the print side with Jim on the publishing side. So Jim, we're going to start with you. AAP released their stat shot numbers, the final 2023 numbers. And of course, everybody's always asking, where's the publishing? How's the publishing industry doing? So what did the industry see in 2023? Any surprises that you saw?
Everybody hear me okay?
No. Nope.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay now?
All right.
What a button will do. Okay, so I suspect a fair amount of you maybe have looked at the AAP numbers. For those of you who haven't, in actuality, it was a little bit more of the same. They had used a new statistical group to do it this year, and the one thing they found was the industry was actually bigger, about $30 billion. But if anybody who's followed the industry for any length of time knows those numbers change every quarter, or not every quarter, every 4 or 5 years. So it's hard to have a real through trend line. But what it showed was that sales between 2019 and 2023 were up about 6%. And of course, as we all know, 2019 was the last year before the pandemic. And in 2023, sales had actually fallen about a little less than 1%, but units were down 5.6%. And for many of you in the room, the decline in units is probably the most important thing. And the report is chock full of dollars going up and units going down. And of course, the way the publishers have been able to offset the decline in units was to raise the prices. They have a relatively straight formula to figure out what the prices are. They divide unit sales into dollars. And they have found that units have, typically gone down the last several years. But they found that in 2023, prices had gone up the most. And I don't think this is a surprise for anybody in this room. Anybody who attended any sort of industry event the last 2 or 3 years said there was definitely going to be a push on prices to counteract the units, and that there really hadn't been much of a price increase in books over the last X number of years. And of course, underlying all of the concerns over cost is that supply chain cost and raw materials and everything was going up. And the publishers just didn't think there was really any other way to counteract the decline in units but to raise prices. And we are seeing some signs of hate back against the price increases. Some of you probably know the book selling fall regional shows are well underway. We've had a number of people there, and bookstores and booksellers are starting to suggest that they're hearing some pushback from their consumers against $30 or $30 and more hardcovers. So, I think we all know there's a fine line between how much you can actually raise prices and where the demand might stop to drop off. And quickly, in terms of some of the big categories in publishing last year, trade sales fell by 1.4%. I don't think that was a surprise to anybody. But I think the bigger news there was that units were down almost 5%. And that's, again, I think it was the biggest unit drop in like 3 years. So while the dollar sales have been able to overcome some of the unit decline, there hasn't really been any growth in units at all, and probably nobody in this room is shocked by that. The other thing that the AAP really highlighted was the growth in digital. Ebook sales are, generally not flat, but I think they were up 2% last year. But really, what has taken off, and anybody who's read PW or any other industry publication knows why that is. Digital audio is through the roof. Digital audio now is poised to be bigger than ebooks. The AEP numbers, what we get to in a couple of seconds, for the first 6 months of the year did show that in the trade segment, digital audio was bigger than ebooks. And the digital numbers, let's see, according to the AAP in 2023, digital was 22.5% of trade sales, up from 20.3% of sales a year ago. And as we could see for the 6-month period, that number is even higher. I believe digital, we throw in audio, is almost 25% of trade now. I'm sorry, not just, digital altogether, including audio. And I don't think there's any mystery why digital audio is so high. Spotify has really upped the ante on the audiobook side. And it's not just their entrance, which is fresh new blood, fresh new money, ramping up the marketing promotions of audio. I was talking to one of the execs on the print side that it's really engaged Audible to actually start marketing and not sit on its monopoly, shall we say. So he was making the point, look, it's a win-win. You got Audible upping its game, and you got Spotify, injecting new energy into it. Which probably makes the argument this industry could stand for more competition. But that's a different topic that I'm happy to talk about. So I think those are the highlights. In terms of the print formats, I mean, the good news is it looks like, at least the AAP, print is still hanging in there. Hardcover went up a little last year, as did trade paperback. So there is some overall growth in that market too. And I think everybody here knows mass market paperback is pretty much kaput. It's like 0.3% of the industry now. So unfortunately, I think we know where that's headed. And just I thought it might be interesting to take a quick look at how the channel's operating in terms of where the books are being sold. During the pandemic, online sort of flattened out a little bit, and it was largely due to the Amazon withdrawal from ordering a lot of books during 22 as they sorted through inventory. But online was back up by about 10%. So that was really healthy rebound for Amazon. But on the same side, the physical book market grew about 0.5%. So, bookstores still are hanging in there. So I think we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. 2024 may not be the world's worst business environment. So
well, yeah, let's talk more on the print side, because I mean, it sounds like, based on what you said there, even though less units were sold, people were paying a little bit more per unit. So print books are still there. So Marco, in terms of the print side of things, what did printers see in 2023? Any big trends or changes to the trends that have been going on?
Sure. A couple of things. First of all, I don't print. I actually don't make equipment, but our company's helped to develop all of these inkjet presses that have been around since about 2007. So we do a lot of research in inkjet technology, and that gives you a little bit of context to my answers. So a couple of things. During COVID, we had this amazing benefit of having onshoring come back of book manufacturing in the US. And truly, they were, almost like the golden years because all of a sudden we're getting more volume, we're able to charge more. And, it was exciting. It was a change in business model. Fast forward to 2023, and all of a sudden, pricing became an issue again because the supply chain coming in from Asia had stabilized a little bit. People were getting more concerned about, the cost of books and et cetera. So all of a sudden, price pressure became an issue on a lot of these book manufacturers. And that led to a number of other things. We believe there's only about 150 book manufacturers left in the US. And with that relatively few number, there's an amazing amount of consolidation. A lot of that is driven by private equity because they look at the printing industry or what you might call the book manufacturing industry as an industry that has amazing cash flow, right? If you don't pay, you don't get more books. So the cash flow on it is really good. You pay your paper suppliers after you've gotten your money in. It's still a good business. So more pressure. And what's really happened is that in order for us to reduce our cost as a book manufacturing industry here in the US, we have to become a lot more efficient. So how do we do that? A couple of ways. Number one, we have to standardize really on formats. And I love John Galligan for his, I only do 8.5 by 11, 8.5 by 11, and 8.5 by 11. Those are my three sizes. And he's ahead of his time. I think that is actually where we're headed because if you look at the infrastructure of the legacy book manufacturers, they've got so much equipment, so many different cutters and slitters and binders and, oh my God, any format you want. But all of that takes labor. And it's complicated to find that labor. It's maybe a little bit different here in Massachusetts, but I have a customer in Oregon, and when they go out to hire new labor, 60% of that potential candidate fails the drug test. And so they can't hire them because it becomes a legal liability when you're around heavy equipment. So finding qualified labor has become an enormous problem. So what you do find is more expensive labor. So again, it has to become more automated. That's where inkjet plays a really big role. Inkjet today is not the end-all technology, although I tend to be very partial to it. We believe somewhere between 20 to 25% of all book pages are now printed on inkjet technology. It is a huge volume, and it continues to grow year after year because you can do these shorter runs, right? The days of the super long bestsellers are gone. There's more authors than ever before. The average run length on a self-published book over the course of that life of the book is about 200 books. So you can imagine that these just-in-time, very short runs put an enormous amount of pressure on the traditional infrastructure of book manufacturing. So last comment, and that is right now, I think we're in a very delicate sort of balance as to, do we bring more books in? Do we import more books because of the cost pressure? Or do we pay a little bit more potentially and have it be based here? And the reason why I say it's delicate is because as of this morning, again, there's another big port strike. So what happens as we get to Christmas, right? And so unless you start having some flexibility in that supply chain, you're going to find yourself in situations where it gets very complicated to meet demand. And so, low pricing is critical, right, to everybody's business. But at the end of the day, there's that balance. So I urge you to, as publishers at least, to look very carefully where you want to balance some of these decisions. That's my comment.
No, thank you, Marco. And Jim, we have seen some information from a few publishers, other groups, AAP, et cetera, around 2024 and some of these changes that Marco mentioned as things are kind of flowing as it goes. So what have you seen? What's that looking like for this year?
Well, actually, this year is actually, I think I alluded to, is actually not doing too bad. Kind of citing AAP and BookScan for the first 6 months of the year, AAP was up, BookScan was pretty flat. Across the board, AAP sales are up about 5 points. A lot of that was coming from trade, and it was really coming from nonfiction. nonfiction is still where, the golden goose is being laid in publishing nowadays. And I think, talking to some people, one reason for that is, again, it sounds maybe a little odd to talk about the pandemic, but they do think the pandemic's behind them and the supply chain is acting, I guess, Brian O'Leary, as good as it's ever been, relatively speaking. So, that's not saying maybe all that much, but it's better than it was, in 2020 through 2022 and even into 2023. And I know I was talking to one of the big five CEOs, and he is pretty confident all the inventory that had been laying around in Amazon and other warehouses and Barnes and Noble has all been cleared out. So there's a lot more room, there's a lot more ordering, and so that's a really dynamic thing, and even nonfiction has seen a spurt up in sales. Some of that has come from biography. People might have heard of J.D. Vance. Hillbilly Elegy sold. They might sell 1 million copies this year. And that first week after he was announced as the vice presidential candidate, Harper reported they sold 200 million copies. And my question to everybody in this room is, how did they fulfill 200 million copies when he was only named on Monday? And book scan numbers come out on Saturday. So I don't know if Harper had some books lying around there that just happened to hit the spot in the right spot. But it's an interesting dilemma there. Some people did say they use POD, so there we go. And at any rate, the softest spot, as I think I may have alluded to already, has been children's. Adult is doing good, on the top side in adults. I think we all have heard Romantasy by now, and it is driving the industry. If you look into book scan numbers, you could probably stick Romantasy in the fantasy section. That's up 63% over last year. Anything related in that target is really still just booming, and there's only signs that more is to come. The weakest segment has obviously been children, and I think I might talk about that a little more now, but I can go into it quickly here. The biggest problem has been a middle grade, ages basically 8 to 12. They just can't seem to crack what's going wrong with it. There's a lot of theory that it's screen time that's really eating into people reading habits. And we did a story in PW 6 weeks or so ago that the publishing industry didn't really disagree with that. Their answer really is to try to co-opt it and to work with not necessarily TV or film, but to incorporate maybe some live elements into there. I think one person said, "Look, screen time isn't going to go away. We have to find a way to make books as entertaining and as lively as possible if they want to compete with the digital versions of things." And a couple of other theories have been floated about why mid-list and children's in general have been down, and book bans is one of them. Again, an executive, one of the CEOs said, "Look, you really can't ignore it. These whole book ban things have made buyers, especially in libraries, really wary about what they're going to acquire. So they're really sticking to backlists and kind of ignoring the front list or anything that might smack of getting themselves in trouble." So that's one thing. On the good news front, another exec was saying that one of the big five, their own internal research has showed that there's no dip in reading interest among younger people. So he sees that as a positive. And I know we all know Book Talk has been, driving a lot of sales lately, and that certainly does filter down into young adult, which might not be children's, but Book Talk is really doing well. I mean, James Staunton, the head of Barnes and Noble, once told me that the stores fill up when the school bell rings. So there's still a lot of interest in reading among, younger people. It's just a question of engaging people and how to reach people.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to turn in my resignation soon to become a romantasy writer, but that'll have to wait for another day. So Marco, what issues would be top of mind then for printers, based on what Jim's saying?
So it depends which day you woke up and what's on your mind. But there's a few things that worry me. The one thing that worries me most is actually the cost of paper.
Mike. Oh, I don't think it's on.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry. So the one thing that worries me most is the rising cost of paper. So we've been very fortunate, right, during COVID in that paper cost did go up, but we were able to pass it on to the consumers. Things have balanced out a little bit more at this point. We've seen more paper imports, which is good. But long term, the paper mills are looking at the printing and writing industry and saying, look, this has been going down for 12 years. We're not reinvesting in this. And in fact, we're going to take our paper mills and convert them to packaging and tissue papers because that's far more profitable. And so what you end up getting is these paper mills, which are mostly private equity owned again these days, are seeing volumes go down, but their profit goes up, right? So I'm making less, I'm charging more for packaging papers, tissue papers. So they're happy. But that really hurts us as an industry because we're not there yet. But I would imagine in the next 10 years, we're going to look at books as a real luxury. It's not a right for people to have books. It will be a luxury because they're going to be a lot more expensive. That's not necessarily a bad thing for the publishers, right? Because prices will continue to go up, but it's not a great thing for us as book manufacturers. But what that means is that the run lengths are going to get shorter. And you're only going to sell what's really topical. And that worries me quite a bit about the comments you made about, people focusing on the backlist because they're safe and we're not getting new content in because it might be too edgy. And so all of that, creates a long-term concern, particularly for younger readers, right? Because we need that habit to get instilled at an early age to continue. So paper is one big concern I have. If you look at other concerns, our demographics are changing, right? There's not a lot of growth in our market in the U.S. Birth rates have gone down. So that, again, becomes a habit issue. Last, if you also look at where we're going in terms of technology, one of the things that I foresee is that the next generation of inkjet presses, and again, I'm biased towards inkjet, are going to get a lot more productive. And when I say productive, that means they're linearly, they're going to run a lot faster, but they may also get wider. And so that means that you're going to see even more consolidation of volume because when you invest, what will be, let's say, a $3 million investment just in the press, you're going to have a lot of volume through it. So price competition, again, is going to get a little bit stronger among the book manufacturing side, unless you specialize. And so there'll be, book manufacturers that are going to have a niche and they're going to do great in their niches. And then there'll be a few really large ones. They're going to be super effective. By the way, they're not necessarily always centralizing that production because shipping costs is an issue. So when you see all these acquisitions of book manufacturers doing roll-ups, sometimes they keep the regional plants in order to get closer to the customer. Last, and I don't think they're here, but I always am sort of careful about this, but the gorilla in the room is Amazon. And so Amazon, they're very ADD, right? So they've got this focus on trying to become a book manufacturer themselves for years, and then, they get distracted and go a different way. And so the majority of books that they sell obviously are in-source from book manufacturers and publishers. But they are expanding the amount of volume that they do in-house. We believe, and it's impossible to verify, so I confidently stand here before you saying, we think it's this number, but I can't prove it to you. But based upon our calculations, we think that Amazon produces about a quarter of the digital pages of books in total that they sell that are digitally printed. So let me maybe clarify that a little bit. So Amazon, about 25% of the pages that are sold through Amazon are digitally printed. And of those, 25% we believe are printed in-house by Amazon. And you know, the concern I have for us on the book manufacturer side of the house is Amazon, you know, thrives on these super efficiencies, and they're getting very smart about understanding where the costs are and things like that. So they're leveraging that knowledge to push the book manufacturers to say, hey, we know exactly what your costs are. We're going to give you X% margin, and you either love it or you don't love it. And so that puts a lot of pressure on us. Now, there is a little bit of good news from a efficiency side, because all of that pressure also pushes things like finishing equipment manufacturers to become more efficient. And that's a huge issue in our industry. So we're putting in hundreds of millions of dollars into R&D on inkjet development. Unfortunately, the finishing side lags a little bit because the finishing equipment companies are significantly smaller in size, and they just don't have the R&D budgets that the inkjet manufacturers have. So there's a little bit of a lag, and you may find that at some point these inkjet presses are going to outrun what the finishing equipment can do. So another sort of silly concern, but all of that matters.
Oh, for sure. And although I'm sure there's some finishing equipment manufacturers in the room that'll tell you that they're going to have stuff to keep up, right? Right, Steve? So Jim, we talked about it a little bit, but in terms of, you know, bestsellers really don't carry the business anymore. The long tail has gotten longer. You know, there's more titles than ever with self-publishing and more ISBNs being issued every year than the year before. So, you know, what are there specific things that are driving sales, or what role do bestsellers play? Are there new publishing models that are developing to try to help compete with the traditional approach that the large publishers are using?
Well, I can't resist a chance to talk about Amazon either. So, especially since it's not being written in PW and they can't hold it against me. So we just did a story. I don't know, some of you may have seen it, how much employment in the publishing industry has fallen since 1990. For those of you who haven't, from 90 down to 2023, it's fallen about 40%. I mean, a lot of that is industry consolidation among the publishers, but some of that is also just a change in the way books are being bought and produced. And to Marco's point, I was talking to Amazon, you know, one of those rare occasions, and they didn't argue with that. You know, the self-publishing industry is worth like $3 billion now. So, I mean, most of those $3 billion are coming in ebooks. So, I mean, that's a big drain on where other certain segments are going to go. I mean, we all know, I mean, since the dawn of ebooks, there's been three categories that have really taken a hit: romance, mystery, and sci-fi. And that's, you know, I don't think there's any real deep analysis needed to figure out why mass market paperback in those areas has kind of just died on the vine. They're all being sold and bought by, you know, in digital format, either through some of the traditional publishers or through the $2.99 self-published Amazon properties, which there are many properties. But in terms of bestsellers, I did see Marco's presentation last year about the decline of the mega seller. And I can't argue with that. The days of the Harry Potter and the Hunger Games, I mean, those are gone forever. But as anybody who may have at least vaguely followed the Penguin Random House trial when they tried to buy Simon & Schuster, I mean, there was a PRH executive after exec went up there and said, "Oh yeah, we need bestsellers." So you know, bestsellers, you know, do drive the business. But you know, I think to Matt and Marco's point, I mean, they're not the huge driver that they were. They just can't deliver the numbers. I remember we used to do forecast reports for, you know, how is the children's market going to do, you know, over the next 4 or 5 years. So our main criteria was, what year is Harry Potter coming out? So we don't have that to fall back on anymore. So it's got a little trickier. But, bestsellers are still pretty robust. I was just doing a quick number. Last year, there were 8 titles that sold over 1 million copies. In 2022, there were 7 titles that sold over 1 million copies. But, going back to 2021, there was only 2. So they don't, the numbers aren't as great as they were. But, I mean, we all know who Colleen Hoover is. So, bestsellers, do create superstar authors, and they do create a lot of buzz around certain books. And it's stuff like Iron Wing, which comes from a relatively new publisher, Entangled Publisher, that has really driven romantasy, and she has a lot more planned for that. So that's good. And there are some new imprints coming up around romantasy. One from Red Tower itself that's coming up, and there are a few new adult title imprints coming up. I mean, I think Macmillan just announced one a couple of months ago. They're encouraged by trying to encourage the younger readers to publish books that they really may actually want to buy. So that's something else that they have on their drawing board. And there's been a lot of talk about new models, because there's a lot of thinking in the industry that this old model of trying to, pay advance, just do guesswork largely on advances and pay huge ones and see what happens, is kind of dying out, especially among people who are not in the big 5. I mean, that still is the big 5 model for most, by and large. But, the most famous non-traditional model was announced early this year, when Madeline McIntosh, who had famously left PRH, set up her hybrid publisher called Authors Equity. All right. But it's a hybrid model. And I think most of you in this industry know hybrid has been around for a long time. And the basis of it is the authors either get a really, really small advance, or they don't get any. And they get, as much as half of the proceeds of the sale of the books. But Madeline's announcement, I think, gave this model a lot of visibility. I mean, the Times wrote about it. I think a lot of the major publications wrote about it. So we'll see if this gives it a jump start. And there have been other successful hybrids around, and they're doing pretty well. Well, one thing I would say, their print runs are generally pretty modest. I mean, I don't know about the days of going to print with 500,000 copies is around. From my talks to people, I think this concept that a number of companies have been trying to drive home, that if you keep your initial print run short and use POD demand to fill in any expected boost before you go back to offset, I think that has largely sunk in to a lot of the publishers I've talked to. So they're really, and this is all focusing on cost. So I do think the time is right for people in all parts of the industry to try to come up with a way to operate more efficiently, but not just by cutting costs, but by finding books that they can actually print in the print runs that 100,000 aren't going to come back. And you can't overlook the fact that Barnes and Noble's James Daunt, he is driven to keep returns down. I think that was another factor in why some of the sales were a little bit sluggish in 22 and 23. He was sending books back left and right. I mean, his target is 5%. And from what I judge from the publishers, that is definitely the case. In some ways, this does frustrate them because it does lower the first printings that they can do. So there's kind of a real tug and war between what's going on with BNN and what's going on with the big publishers. But BNN's doing really well. They're private now, so we don't really know what the numbers are. I think that the best way to look at how they are doing is they're opening at least 50 stores this year, which the most stores they've opened at least since Len Riggio was around. So, we're looking at, maybe a really potent force in the physical book world. So again, I think that's a good thing, but it does mean I can't really express to you the number of different people who trying to come up with some different model on paying a big advance and then seeing what we can do. I mean, there's a lot going on.
Yeah. Well, if anybody wants to pay me a big advance for my Romantasy series, let me know. So Marco, with all that, we're seeing some folks trying to be, okay, first run offset, short run digital fill in, POD after the fact. Do we send it to China? What's happening? What if we have to export to the EU? We'll talk about EUDR later, very briefly, because the answer is there are no answers. But what do we have an election coming up, believe it or not, and tariffs have been mentioned. So with the tariffs, POD, China, EU regulations, what does this all mean for the U.S.?
It's a glorious mess, and it's going to get worse, right? Because everything is so unpredictable. So the tariffs coming in from China are potentially a good thing for us short term, but nature abhors a vacuum. So I would guess, and it's strictly a guess, that if those tariffs occur, then China will send book blocks to Vietnam. They'll get bound there and they'll be imported as books from Vietnam with no tariff. I mean, there's so many ways around it. In the textile industry, which is a totally different market, of course, we've seen these fast fashion brands called Shein and Temu, which are marketing over TikTok directly to our kids. And they produce things on demand, drop ship them directly to your house, and completely circumvent the 25% tariff, because the order value is under $800. And so the growth of that has been enormous. So I'm not saying that we'll see Chinese book manufacturers drop ship things into the US market, but who the heck knows, right? So these things are a moving target. I know you don't want to talk about Europe, but there's a little good news in that short term, I think, for us as book manufacturers, and that is Europe is getting very, very rigorous about compliance of having certified papers. So as of January 1st, in 2025, you have to be able to prove that that paper was harvested from a specific GPS location and that you have a certificate of compliance, which is going to cost money for somebody somewhere along the line. The net result is we believe that paper imports into Europe are going to drop off tremendously, because you can't prove compliance if you're buying paper out of the rainforest in Asia somewhere. And so as a result, I suspect a lot of that paper from Asia is going to come into the U.S. market, which will give us more supply, which will stabilize prices, and maybe even reduce paper prices short term for a little bit. So I think short term that's a good thing for us. But as you sort of hinted at, we live in a global economy, and just because paper is cheaper here, it doesn't mean we can actually then sell our printed books to Europe or God knows where. I noticed, by the way, I bought this series called Slow Horses. It's a mystery writer. Guess where it's printed? India. I don't think I've ever seen a book printed out of India. But anyway, so things are moving very quickly. So I would urge you to just pay attention to all of these global things that are going on that you don't think affect you. But, obviously the election is going to affect you. The tariffs are going to affect you. The paper compliance issues are going to affect you. Ports, right? Strike in ports. So all of these things are just moving targets. So our business, frankly, is getting more complicated. It's not getting simpler.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm going to open it up to questions for these folks. If anybody has any, I'll be the roving reporter here. Any questions for Marco or Jim? Yeah,
Good morning, Jim. Wondering if you have any stats on the education market.
right, the education market. We have, let me see, I have to look through here. I believe the education market was up slightly, like around 4 or 5%. And once again, on the K-12, there's no new numbers because they haven't reported on time. So you might know better why they're not reporting on time than I do, but they're not reporting on time. And one thing I would point to in the higher education market, and we've written about this quite a lot, is the inclusive access that's being introduced into more and more schools and what used to be college bookstores. And this is that instead of buying your books at the college store, you're buying all your course materials is either part of your tuition or some other fee. So you get everything up front. I think you're seeing a higher mix of maybe digital materials going into this, but everything is being bought up front and sort of circumventing the college store. And they're doing this because it's actually cheaper, well, especially for the students, but also the publishers have signed off on this because they feel that the college stores get a truer number of text they want to order, so they're not overprinting. They're printing more to a specific number. And it seems to be catching on. Barnes & Noble just education, no relation to Barnes & Noble. It had, I think, like 45% of their purchases for the fall came through this inclusive access program. And it's something a lot of people are pushing. You may have seen that the government tried to kind of squelch it in some roundabout way, not necessarily targeting that, but it was part of Biden's unnecessary taxes on like your concert tickets. But this was really just the opposite. You're paying cheaper cheaper prices for college textbooks because you're being included in this bigger package, and the college stores were being having less cost to pay for the textbooks. And from what I saw from Barnes & Noble's education report, doing very well, and the AAP numbers, actually for the first time, those of you, I do have some numbers, the first time the AAP annual statistics showed they broke out inclusive access in terms of that versus traditional textbooks. So anybody interested in that, let Matt know. And I have a link in Publishers Weekly that I will send you.
Yeah. So
I wrote the story.
So what we'll do, folks, is for this session, and then I know one of our later sessions, if any of the speakers have any sort of PDFs, links, or anything else they want to share with everybody, we will put that in the Whova app. That was one thing I didn't mention during the logistic talk. Download the Whova app. There's a QR code outside, but that gives you the agenda for today, the attendee list, but we will also put links there from the various sessions. So we got time for the two if it's quick, Kevin. What? You got to use the mic because we're recording. Sorry, Kevin.
You're asking me a question?
Yeah, Jim and I work together. Can you address the graphic novels market, how the growth is just taking off? I think it'd be interesting.
I'll answer half that, Kevin. Graphic novels, as I think a lot of you know in this room, from about 2016, 2017, were by far the fastest growing format in the industry. Lots of companies popped up. A lot of them were doing super well. And I have a number written down here that shows for last year, graphic novel sales were down about 13%. But you do have to keep that in some kind of context. It's down from the high, which was, I don't have to off the top of my head, but it was an extraordinary number. Graphic novels, I think in 1 year was actually the largest genre within adult fiction. Now, even though it's fallen down, it's still fifth. So it's still a really vibrant market, and it's actually a more complicated market than I can actually follow because it's being morphed into so many different types of media products. It's not just books. It's your printed books. It's online. There's all these anime things. There's things I never heard of. And New York Comic Con, I think, has either happened or is happening next week or two. But one thing was really interesting. I know we did a story on New York Comic Con is growing bigger than ever, yet the number of comics publishers attending is down. So the thesis is it's growing into what San Diego Comic Con has morphed into. Again, it really started as a comics graphic novel place, and now it's taken over by movies and all these other formats.
All right. Last question, Keith.
Question on standardization. Our publishing company is distributed by Simon & Schuster, and even though as a publisher, I am very in favor of standardization, we are getting a lot of push from retailers, including Barnes & Noble, to add as many bells and whistles to our books as possible to make them stand out. So how can we navigate this with printers to find a good space where we can add the effects that we need, but maintain costs?
So I think we have to parse out your question to two pieces. One is standardization on sheet size, right, is probably going to have to become the norm. Book covers, right, which are usually the thing that really stands out. That's where you're going to see more things like embellishment and metallics and neons and anything that catches people's attentions, I think.
And we'll probably cover that a little bit more in the upcoming panels with the printers and the publishers.
So there's less standardization on book covers, but more on sheet size, I think.
Jim, anything to?
No,
No. Yeah,
I doubt it.
yeah. I think so folks know and first off, thank you very much to Marco and Jim. Appreciate that.